Going on, YouTube viewers? Rick here at Rick's Automotive. This is a continuation of a 3 or 4 part, I think, video. I forget how many videos I've made of this car, but it's a 2006 Acura TL. Did a power steering pump reseal, front and side engine mount. This will be the third video. So this will be the valve cover video. We're going to do the valve cover gaskets on the front and rear cylinder heads and the spark plug tube seals. It's leaking oil all on the front here as well as on the back valve cover. So in this video, I'm just going to walk you through the steps that I'm going to take to replace those gaskets. Alright, I've already got my fender covers on the car from the previous repair, so I'm good there. I'm protecting the customer's paint because you do lean over quite a bit to do this repair. The first thing I remove is the intake manifold. You've got these 10mm bolts all along here. Those have to come out. I will do that first. Got all my bolts and my nuts removed. This just comes right off real easy. The next thing I do is I'm just going to go through everything here in no specific order. You got a vacuum line here. This has to come off. I just loosen the hose clamp and pull that off. This connector here, you see the tabs, just press on that. That comes off. That's actually attached to the manifold. It controls the baffles in here. And you have a sensor here that gets unplugged. You take this hose off here. You can leave everything else on. You don't have to unplug anything over here. Just take this hose off. And once you take that hose off, you'll have a 10mm bolt here and one directly below it here. And you can just take this off and set it to the side. Then you have this vacuum line. I believe this goes to your brake booster. That slides off. This vacuum line comes off. This 10mm comes off, and just set the whole bracket aside. And that should be all to get the top part of the intake manifold off. And once we get all those off, we'll disconnect the throttle body. Got everything off that I mentioned. Like I said, this just sits aside. It's got those 2 bolts there. You don't have to take anything else off except for the hose clamp here in the hose. And the back, these just slide off. Set that aside. Next, I'm going to take off the air box here and this hose so I can access the throttle body. The 12mm, I think 2 bolts and 2 nuts that hold the throttle body on. And I'm going to take that off, and then after I'll take that off, I'm going to move on to the actual bolts that hold the manifold to the bottom plenum of the intake manifold. To remove the air box and this tube going to the box to the throttle body, you've got a 10mm on a hose clamp. Loosen that. I'm going to take this hose out of the tube here. This clamp just pinches. These things are in there pretty good. You might have to fight that a little bit, but just pinch that. I usually use a pair of vice grips to hold that in place and pull away from there. That'll come out. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4 8mm bolts that hold the top of the airbox to the bottom. There's a Phillips option, but you typically end up stripping that out, so I always use the 8mm socket. All right, I've got the hose disconnected at the throttle body. Next, I'm going to take the throttle body off. There's a map sensor on top. Just unplug that. There's a little push pin there. Just push and pull out. I'm not going to take any of the coolant hoses off here. I'm only going to take off the 2 nuts and the 2 bolts, which are all 12mm. I'm going to take those off. And a lot of times this throttle body will just slide off, or sometimes I'll tap it gently with a rubber mallet, which it'll break free from the gasket. In fact, it won't even damage the gasket. I've probably done, I have no idea, honestly. If I had to guess, several hundred intake manifold removals for various reasons over the years on the V6 Honda and Acuras. Seldom have I ever had to replace intake manifold / throttle body gasket. So if you're careful, you'll be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these bolts and show you how I do that. I've got all 4 of the fasteners off the throttle body. I've got this rubber mallet here. You don't have to hit this very hard at all. In fact, you don't want to hit, you don't want to hit a sensor or something, so there's no need to, slug this thing, but just take it and just hit it about that hard. You'll see it just separated there. And just slides back, and you'll see And the gasket there is all intact. Nothing's torn. There's no gasket material that transferred over to the throttle body. Before I put this back on, I'll go ahead and clean the surfaces, both surfaces, and tighten it back up and torque it to specifications, but I've never had one leak after reusing it. So you're more than welcome to try to replace yours if you wish, but I'm just showing you what I do. But the next, I'm going to get this off here and leave that to the side. You don't have to take apart anything else on that. And then we're going to remove all these 12 millimeter bolts, and there's 2 nuts, 1 on each side. Now when I'm removing this, I want to start on the outside fasteners. You've got 2 over here, and you've got 2 over here. So I'm going to remove the 2 outside ones and just go back and forth. I'll remove this one, then I'll go here, then I'll go here, then I'll go here. And I'll keep working my way inwards until I get to the last 2 right here on the inside. That'll prevent this, this is aluminum, so it'll prevent from any warpage possibly happening. Okay, I've got all the fasteners removed, a total of 9. Next, I'm going to go ahead and lift the manifold from the engine. Intake manifold is now removed. You can see these holes here go down to, I don't know if you can see that or not, but they go down to the intake valves and down to the cylinder head. So you definitely want to cover those up. You can use a shop towel or whatever you want to do. A long time ago, I just took a piece of cardboard, and you can see how many times I've used this thing, but just kind of goes in the studs there. That covers all that up. That way I don't drop any nuts or bolts or anything that's not supposed to go down there. So the next thing I'm going to do is remove is the ignition coils on both the front and the rear cylinder head. To remove the ignition coils, on this particular car, it has an Allen head, or an Allen inside of the bolt head. It's a number 6, I believe. Yep, number 6. And this socket that I have here actually has a rounded, if you can see, it's got like a rounded beveled edge, which is great because it allows for different angles, which is not necessary to have this. I just have it because the back cylinder heads on these is kind of hard to get to sometimes, so it's kind of nice to have that. Got the 3 bolts out of the front coils. These 2 here will come right out. This one, you can see it's hitting the coolant reservoir, so this is going to have to come out. To take that out, it's pretty simple. There's just one 10 millimeter bolt here on this car, and this whole bracket comes out, and then you just lift that right out of the way. And then onto the back. I haven't taken those out yet, but in order to even access those, there's this plastic paneling here. This is going to have to be removed. It has these little tabs right here, right here. You just push those in, pull it up, and it comes right out. Have all the ignition coils removed. The number 6, cylinder number 6 ignition coil looks like it's got some oil that's been spilling past the tube seal. It damaged the boot here on the end. You can see how this one here, that's how it's supposed to look. That's how this one looks. It's all torn and saturated with oil. Luckily this customer already agreed to replace the tube seals as well as the valve cover gaskets together, which is why I always recommend doing them both together, because those tube seals, if they leak, they usually take out an ignition coil. This one works okay, there's no misfires, but certainly has been compromised, and I'm sure its lifespan has been cut short. So I would replace that if I were the customer, but I'm not sure what he was going to want to do. But the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to pull this is the front valve cover, pull the dipstick out. This wiring harness that runs along here has got to come off. It's got 2 tabs on it. You got one here, just press that tab and press this tab. It just comes out of the way there. It doesn't come off, it just raises up. And I've already got this bolt loose, this 14 millimeter bolt that holds a bracket on for the O2 sensor connectors. I'm not going to remove the wiring, I'm just going to leave it all attached to the bracket. But by taking that off, it allows me to move the harness much further. And then once that's out of the way, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts that hold the valve cover to the cylinder head. Those are 10 millimeters. I'm gonna go ahead and remove those next. Got all the fasteners loose that hold the valve cover to the cylinder head. This middle one here, be careful, this thing is just resting in there. Usually it fall off. The other ones for some reason usually stay pretty snug, but this guy always falls off, so go ahead and set him aside. I'm not going to take this off just yet because I still have to take the back valve cover off. I don't want to drop anything in here that may make its way down to the oil pan. So it's loose, I think. Yeah, it's loose. You can pry up on the corners here if you need to. Be very careful you don't scratch the mating surface if you're using like a pry tool or a screwdriver. I always put a shop towel on the end of my screwdriver or whatever I'm using to pry with, just in case it prevents you from scratching anything. This should come off pretty easily. I just pulled up on the oil cap there and it came right off. So the front one's off. I'm gonna go ahead and go start in the back. The first thing I'm gonna do back here, I've got this power steering line, has a bracket right here. You can see that there's a 10mm bolt right there. I'm gonna take that off. This wiring harness here that houses these connectors, there's a 10mm bolt somewhere up here. There it is. You can see my finger right here. And there's another one. If I can see it or not, but there's another one right there. It's blurry, but it's like right here, just on the back side. So I'm gonna take that 10mm off, that 10mm off, and this bracket for the power steering line off. I have the bracket removed. I've got this wiring harness here removed. You can see how much that opens up everything. The next I'm gonna take off, I've already got the hose clamp pushed back. I'm gonna take this hose off here. It's on the side of the valve cover. And then after that, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the fasteners, the 10mm bolts that hold the valve cover to the rear cylinder head. Those are in the same location as the front. It's just turned. So it's like a mirror image, just turned. I'm gonna go ahead and get this hose off and remove these bolts. Got all the fasteners removed, loose, that hold the valve cover to the cylinder head. Remove the one, just like on the front one here, these tend to be pretty loose and they'll fall out, so I just took it off and set it aside. This is the angle I pull it out at. I kind of lift it up. Again, I just used on the back here, I didn't have to on the front, but on the back I used a flathead screwdriver with a shop towel wrapped around it and just gently pried here in the corner. And that came right off, and then just lifted up on it, and now I'm going to remove it. Got the rear valve cover removed, and I'm going to go on to the front one. The front one, just lift up on it like so, and I pull it out at that angle where I tip the oil cap side down towards the radiator, pull this back like so, and then just lift it straight up. Got both valve covers removed. The gaskets are pretty hard, which is probably why they were leaking. And then this is the front valve cover, this is the rear valve cover. The front number 6 tube seal, you can see here, has got a little bend to, a little curve to it, which is probably why it's was leaking. It's its fixed position. I can't change that. It's hard as a rock too. I'm not sure what happened there, but actually they're all pretty stiff. But we're going to remove all 6 of these, put the new valve cover gaskets on. We're using the OEM stuff, the good stuff, for the valve cover gaskets and the tube seals. And then we'll pick back up with you guys here in a little bit when I go to put everything back together. We got the valve cover gasket off, and I can hold this up. There we go. You can see the cracks in the gasket there. That runs the whole length of the gaskets like that. So probably why I was leaking oil. Got the old spark plug tube seals removed and 2 of the new ones installed. Just wanted to take a moment here to show you what I'm doing here. Using the super high temp ultra grease. This is Honda. This is the good stuff. Just a little bit of that on your finger, and just rub it on the outside of the seal as well as the inside of the valve cover. You don't want, I mean, these ones are already installed. You can see there's nothing like oozing out, so I barely use any, just enough to coat the rubber on the outside of the seal. And I use 2 thumbs to press it in. It goes in pretty easily. Got the valve cover gaskets installed, both, and these spark plug tube seals are also installed. So we're ready to put these back in the car. A couple notes. If you haven't already, this valve cover gasket only goes on one way. You've got a notch here, and you've got a notch here. So if you've got the wrong notch in the wrong location, you'll be short on one end. Don't pull and stretch the gasket. Just change your notches and you'll be good to go. Second is, make sure you're inside the valve cover, make sure there's no debris in there. Also make sure there's no debris on the mating surface of the cylinder head. That way you get a nice tight seal. Make sure there's nothing on the outside of the gasket here. And there's no need to put any silicone on this whatsoever. There's no need to do that, so please, I beg you, don't do that. There's nothing more frustrating than when you go to fix an oil leak, just to find out somebody used silicone on a perfectly good gasket that didn't need it. So there's no need to put silicone on these gaskets, so don't do that. Outside of that, when it comes time to torque the valve cover bolts and the intake manifold bolts, I will stop and let you know what I'm torquing those to. Forgot to mention one more thing with the valve cover gaskets. When you install them, there's these, you see these lines on the gasket. Those lines are there to help hold the gasket in place into the valve cover. So I always go around these, you know, 1 or 2 times and press pretty firmly just to make sure that it's not sticking out anywhere. Because on the back valve cover, these tubes for the spark plug stick up pretty high. You're going to want to make sure that when you put the valve cover over top of these, the valve cover gasket doesn't fall out of the valve cover, because if that happens, you know, it'll stick out or stick in and you'll leak oil everywhere. So I always put the valve cover on, get it over top of the spark plug tubes here, then I reach my hand way back in there and I feel all along the bottom of the valve cover and on the sides, and just to make sure that it's still in place before I actually set it down on the mating surface. I got the valve covers in place, the bolts are hand tight. I used a mirror here and went around the perimeter on both valve covers and just checked to make sure the gaskets were installed properly and they weren't, you know, they didn't fall out during installation, especially on that back one. That back one can really cause problems if you're not careful. I set my torque wrench here to 9 foot-pounds. This thing vibrates when I, instead of clicking, it vibrates. So, and unfortunately, I can't set it to tenths. I have to set it, you know, to a 7, 8, 9. So I just picked 9. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna go down to 8 here. I'm gonna set it to 8 because the specification here is 8.7 per Honda. That way, when I get to 8, it'll buzz. And oh, look at that! That was luck. 8.7 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna go ahead and torque all these down to 8.7 foot-pounds. If you go to 9, that's okay too. If you got a manual torque wrench, just try and get as close to 9 as possible. I've got everything back in its place on both valve covers. So I got the hose back on, wire harnesses back on back here, the power steering bracket's back in place. And the front, I've got the 14mm back in, holding that bracket on. And I've got the front wire harness on the bracket here as well. So dipstick's back in. So I'm ready to put the intake manifold back onto the engine. Got the intake back on, checked to make sure everything was tight, double checked to make sure everything was tight. Everything's good to go. The only thing left to do is put the plastics back on the side here and to start it up and just check for leaks, which I'm not quite ready to do yet. I've got one more thing I got to do this before I start it. So hopefully this video helped you. If it did, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.